Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Whether you are a morning bird or a night owl, I am very glad that you are here with us today on another amazing installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your humble host, Dr. Richard Watkins, and the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN, the leading research and consulting and engagement firm. Find out more about SPAN at span-inc.org. That is span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, let's get right into it today because we have an amazing conversation to be had. And it all starts with peas. Yes, peas, like those little small, I guess, vegetables, beans, seeds. I actually don't necessarily know what peas are. Are peas seeds? Are seeds vegetables? Things with seeds are fruits? Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but it starts with peas. It starts with peas. So, for a long time, including right now, the business of creating food has been paramount. It has been absolutely huge. What we eat determines so much about our life. And so a lot is invested in figuring out how to produce food. Not only that, but so many other things come from understanding how things grow, whether it is clothes that we wear coming from cotton or wool, or the food that we eat, which is grown out of the ground, or the meat that we consume, which comes from livestock, or the dairy products that we ingest, eat, consume. All of these delicious things that we have come from the management of living things, whether they're plants or animals. So get this. There is a really cool material known as wool. Everybody has heard of it. It keeps us warm. We wear it. It is soft. I mean, it is fantastic. Now, everybody out there knows that wool comes from a sheep. Now, I am not a sheep expert. I do not pretend to be. There might be someone out there in the audience that knows way more about wool than I do. But from my understanding, and from most people's understanding, wool comes from sheep. So the sheep moves around and grows all of this wool or hair or fur. I don't know how you categorize it. And when the sheep grows enough wool, you simply shave it, collect the wool, and then you can make so many different amazing things out of it. Now, what would be interesting is trying to figure out how sheep can grow more wool. And if you had sheep that grew high quality wool and grew a lot of it, that would give you a great advantage to sell your product in the marketplace. You would have more of it to sell. The wool would be more higher, like more desirable, right? So not only that, but a lot has gone into trying to figure out certain traits, desirable traits such as this. So trying to figure out what sheep grows the best wool involves an understanding of how sheep express certain traits. Now, a long time ago, we just simply figured that if the sheep has great wool, then you would simply mate it with another sheep that would have great wool, and then their baby sheep or lambs would also have great wool and then would subsequently grow into sheep with great, luscious wool. And this happened. I mean, the understanding that traits can be passed from one generation to another has been fundamental to our understanding of a wide variety of things, including our own selves and the construction of our own society. We oftentimes choose a mate because they have certain traits that we find desirable, with the hope and aspiration that those traits that we hold dear will be passed down to our offspring. It's something that we've understood and appreciated for a very, very long time. So, what ended up happening is that people wanted to develop a better understanding of how these things work in order to profit from it, to create products that were more desirable. And so, an understanding of how traits are passed down from one generation to another, it became very important for economic reasons. Economic reasons. And so people went to work trying to figure out how traits are transferred from one generation to the next. And a huge breakthrough in this regard came with the study of peas or pea plants. There was a researcher, oftentimes referred to as the father of genetics. I believe his last name was Mendel, who studied peas. He then determined that if I just track a particular trait, I can see all that goes into passing a trait down from one generation to another. Now, many of you have taken biology 101, high school biology, and understood that one of the traits that were looked at is the phenotype, or how something looks, regarding smooth or wrinkly peas. He also looked at other things such as colors, but one of the things that he looked at was smooth or wrinkly. And so he was able to create generation after generation of peas, and was really able to really capture a fundamental understanding of what goes into passing down traits. He then broke these traits into two different categories: dominant or recessive. Dominant traits or recessive traits. As the name implies, a dominant trait is dominant, and a recessive trait is recessive. If presented at the same time, the dominant trait would become the visible trait or phenotype, which is something that you can just see or observe, some quality that you can observe of the progeny of that next generation. And if you wanted to have a recessive trait appear in the next generation, you had to do other things like remove the presence of a dominant trait. So over time, he was able to determine how different traits are expressed. And with that understanding, it created the fundamental understanding of what we now know as genetics, which is why Mendel is oftentimes referred to as the father of genetics. Now, we have now come to understand that genetics, or genes, whether they're expressed, how they're expressed, when they're expressed, determine almost everything about us, all of our quirks, how we look, how we talk, how we move. It's genetic. Now, we don't know everything about genetics or genes. This is something that is ongoing. But the study of peas and pea plants and recessive and dominant traits formed that foundation for which we now have started to understand what makes us who we are, from our skin color, for our hair texture, for our height, also genetic diseases, so on and so forth, all came from that understanding of the pea plant. But again, we have had a relationship with this understanding for a very, very long time. Some people may suggest that it is innate, it is part of the human condition to have some appreciation of genetics and traits that we would like to pass down or that we find desirable. So that's genetics. And that's genetics, right? Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but genetics is absolutely amazing once appreciated and understood. It is very complicated. Oftentimes, we don't quite understand what makes what trait, but we're starting to develop an understanding of that. Now, the basic building block of who we are is DNA. Now, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. Long story short, DNA is the basic piece, the basic blueprint, which then codes for RNA, ribonucleic acid, which then codes for proteins, so on and so forth. And proteins are so important for so many aspects of physiology, biology. But it really starts, at least in mammalian genetics or the genetics of mammals. Not every organism, not every biological actor uses DNA as its basic blueprint. But for mammals, including humans, DNA is the blueprint for that. Now, I said biologic actors, and I use that phrase very intentionally because how we understand biology and life, it gets kind of fuzzy when we think about viruses. Now, viruses, they can code who they are in a wide variety of ways. They can package their blueprint for who they are with DNA, RNA, negative sense, positive sense. Again, we can go into that later, but they do it in such a wide variety of ways. It is amazing. Now, so many different organisms have to deal with the presence of viruses. We discussed in another episode, kind of what viruses do. We scratch the surface, so to speak, on virology, but just know that nearly every organism or every organism that I am aware of has to deal with viruses. Humans have to deal with viruses such as human immunodeficiency virus or HIV, um, influenza, which just so happens not to only infect humans, but also marine birds, also livestock such as pigs. You have viruses such as dengue, which is a virus that can be transmitted via an insect. You also have viruses that impact plants like tobacco mosaic virus, which I believe was the first virus imaged. I'm not sure. It was imaged because it's a big old virus and it was big. Now, viruses are tiny, but this one was pretty big, and viruses range in size. Even bacteria have to deal with viruses. Even bacteria have to deal with viruses. Now, we kind of collectively refer to all the small things that make us sick as germs. Now, when we say germs, typically what we are referring to is either viruses or bacteria. Now, not just viruses and not just bacteria alone, make us sick. There are other things that make us sick, such as, fungal infections. That's infections by fungus, right? Cancer makes us sick, and that doesn't always involve a virus. That is simply a consequence of cells in your body refusing to die. We'll touch on that on another episode. But basically, the way that we live healthy lives involves a cycle of cells living and dying. They often die in a process known as apoptosis. That's programmed cell death. That programmed cell death is important for physiology, properly functioning physiology. And when it doesn't happen, the result of that is cancer oftentimes. But I just say that to say that what makes us sick is not exclusively a consequence of bacterial or viral infection. However, when we talk about germs, oftentimes that is what we mean, bacteria or viruses. But what's interesting is even bacteria have to deal with viruses. In fact, viruses wreak havoc on bacteria all over the place. Right now, unbeknownst to you, bacteria are being attacked by viruses. Now, remember, viruses, by and large, are obligate intracellular parasites. They are parasites. They need a host in order to create more of themselves. That is how it works. So, in the case of a virus that infects a bacteria, for lack of a better term, the virus turns the bacteria into a virus producing factory. Now, that's not a good thing for the bacteria. It's not a good thing for us when it happens to us because cells have important functions. And everything that it does is important for that function. So if you transform it into a factory that is used to produce more viruses, that is usually not a good thing. So the viruses that infect bacteria are known as bacteriophages or just phages, and they are abundant. For example, there are millions and millions in ocean water, and they are just waging war against bacteria. Now, you would probably ask if bacteriophages are so deadly to bacteria, how do we have any bacteria left at all? And that is because, just like with ourselves, the bacteria have defense mechanisms. Yes, for as long as bacteria and humans and other organisms have existed, there has been an arms race between virus and its host. And that is very true for bacteria. Usually, a phage gets in, transforms that bacteria into a factory, and that bacteria is toast. However, in many situations, the bacteria can sometimes survive. And when that bacteria survives that attack from that phage, it remembers the phage that attacked it. And so, next time, any phage that attacks it later that resembles the phage that attacked it in the past, it is ready with its defense in place and it protects itself. Pretty cool. We do the same thing. We have an immune system, particularly our adaptive immune system, which remembers historical infections. So when they come again, we are ready to do battle. And oftentimes, those infections do not result in sickness because we are ready for it. Adaptive immunity changes based on experiences that it has. Now, back to the bacteria. The bacteria does something very similar to that. So, the next time that phage comes in, it has a piece of that bacteriophage's genetic sequence. And so it's able to scan that phage the next time it tries to infect it. It pulls out a piece of that genetic information from that phage, just destroys it, gobbles it up. That phage is toast. Phage is toast. It's gone. That is a defense mechanism appropriate for the bacteria. But why would we care at all about how bacteria defend itself against bacteriophages? Well, it turns out that we humans, once we understood or developed an understanding of that defense mechanism against bacteriophages, it turns out we can use that same strategy, that same structure, that same machinery to edit genetic information, to edit genes. Now, that discovery resulted in a Nobel Prize. And it is because that technology, better known as CRISPR, I'll tell you exactly what CRISPR means here, the letters, I'll have to read it. It stands for clustered, regularly interspace, short palindromic repeats. And that aspect of palindrome is really important for genetics, but we'll cover that in another time. Now, usually it's called CRISPR, Cas9, CRISPR, something else. There's a lot of different technologies, but ultimately it allows the efficient and precise editing of genes. Let that soak in. The precise editing of genes. Pause. Let's rewind. Let's revisit. Remember, genes, they inform every aspect of our biology. Every aspect of our biology. Genes. So that means if we have the ability to precisely modify genetic information, then that means we have the capacity to shape life. We have the capacity to shape progeny. We have the ability to customize future generations. And that is ultimately the point that I am trying to go through, a point that started with a discussion of peas, whether they are wrinkly or smooth, an understanding of sheep's wool, all led, and this is over the course of centuries, all led to the point where we are at now, in which we are slowly developing the ability to design life, to design life. So we've laid the groundwork for the, how do I say it? We have laid the groundwork to change the face of humanity forever. It is a fact that it will never be the same again. If continually advanced and if better understood, we will have the ability to create the next generation according to our wishes and desires, no longer leaving things up to chance. I am not saying whether or not this is right to do. I am not saying whether or not this is wrong to do. I'll leave it up to you, the listener, to decide whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. I am simply letting you know that this is here. This is here. And it is an amazing opportunity. Of course, there are downsides to this, meaning that once we genetically modify a human, once we genetically manipulate the processes that will create the desired outcome in a child, that child will grow and then pass traits down to the next generation. This is why I say this technology will transform humanity forever. Because once you do it once, that one individual, once they procreate, they are beginning to introduce new qualities and new aspects to the entire genetic pool of the collection of all of humanity. Just let that sink in. I don't know if we've ever had a time in human existence where in which we can customize our offsprings, customize our children, right? It starts off perhaps like this. You are given the opportunity to screen for or to genetically engineer a child to not have a genetic predisposition to heart disease or a genetic predisposition to any number of genetic diseases. It starts there. But then why not just say, oh, well, I want my child to be tall. I want my child to be fast. I want my child to have a different metabolism so that the obesity that is rampant perhaps in our family, it ends in the next generation. It there's a slippery slope that can be created, because if you can change one trait, then you can change another. And then the question is, what then does a menu of these opportunities create for so many people? Now, that is an interesting reality that we live in. That is a very interesting reality that we live in. Now, if any of this to you sounds like something that you may have heard in the news, you may have heard in the tabloids, social media, a term called designer babies, this is what they're referring to: the ability to decide who your child will be. Now, it is probably true that many mistakes will arise. The ethics of it are murky and cloudy. Should we have that authority? Should we prevent a child from existing simply because they have some genetic predisposition to something that we don't want? Are we playing God? That is a question for you to answer. But again, I stress to you that this technology and this understanding is upon us. It's just amazing to just really think when we just imagine where we are right now and where we've come from as a human civilization, from hunter gatherers to the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution, now to the beginning of our understanding of genetics, to the point in which we can customize everything that it is to be a human, getting closer and closer to no longer playing a game of chance when it comes to children, comes to the creation of your family, having the ability to create just the child you want. Well, that is the end of our time today. My name is Dr. Richard Watkins, your host, your proud host, your humble host of the Richard Watkins Podcast. Hey, listen, I love having these conversations with you. They may feel awkward. You might be introduced to information that you've never heard before, but that's the whole point of why we do what we do. Remember, the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network. Check out the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN, at span-inc.org. And above all, remember, the future is not something to wait for, but it is something to build. And until next time, take care and goodbye.